It's pretty amazing to me that there are scarcely any CYA disclosures, cautionary disclosures, in the proxy statements filed with the SEC these days. I'm so used to thinking of documents filed with the SEC as being liability documents, compliance shields. That's refreshing how far we've come over the past decade. But there still is a little bit of CYA in most proxies. It's inevitable and smart. Today on Zippypoint. Brock Romanek, I'm a big fan of yous. I've loosely ordered these 14 CYAs, cover your arts, randomly, not in any particular order of popularity or severity. 1, adjournment and postponement. This one should be ubiquitous, although I've already cheated a little because this one is rarely mentioned in the proxy statement itself. It's instead listed on the proxy card almost always, and it should be always, that we may adjourn or postpone the meeting. Actually, usually, we will use your proxy for the annual meeting to be held at so-and-so on this date, and at any adjournment or postponements thereof. Always seems to have the antiquated thereof at the end. Anyways, this gives companies the flexibility to change the date of the meeting if there's an emergency, if there's a disruption, if it looks like the company doesn't have enough votes that have been cast to reach quorum, or maybe even the need to solicit more votes to pass something that's on the ballot. You look to state law and your corporate governance documents for the validity of your ability to do that. 2, auditor ratification. So by definition, ratification is a CYA because you've already taken the action. You're now seeking a blessing after the fact. Honey, I've invited my mother to stay with us for a week. That's okay, right? As I noted in my Vid-Guide about why do auditors place ratification on the ballot in the first place, you need it sometimes to reach quorum due to some peculiarities in the proxy plumbing framework, a link to that which is beneath this video. It's where auditor ratification is the way you go about doing it. It's funny that companies actually don't disclose. That's why they're putting ratification of auditors on the ballot. They typically disclose something like, we value our shareholders' opinion and it's a good governance practice. Okay, sure. Companies are supposed to disclose what the audit committee will do if ratification isn't achieved, if it's not supported by a majority of shareholders. That's a third and last required disclosure elicited by item 18 of Schedule 14A. Some companies actually forget to do this. What would they do if ratification wasn't achieved? Because it's so rare for even less than 90% of the vote to come in support of ratification. Some companies disclose that if ratification doesn't happen, again, it needs a majority vote for ratification, we will consider the result a recommendation to consider a selection of a new auditor. Some companies even go further and say that even if companies ratify, we might still decide to change our auditor during the course of the year if that's in the company's best interests. And here's an example of that. 3, failure for a director nominee to meet the majority standard. So if any of our nominees don't get a majority, we'll go through our detailed procedures in the corporate governance guidelines to figure out what to do. So many companies have moved away from a plurality voting standard that was the default standard in many state laws. And over the last decade, companies have switched due to pressure from investors and proxy advisors to either a majority vote standard or a plurality plus standard, and both of which require the company to follow some procedures in the event a nominee fails to obtain a majority. So it's not like a nominee fails to obtain a majority and that person automatically is off the board or won't join the board. There could be a situation where they tender their resignation as required by the procedures that the company has, and a company, the board, refuses to accept that resignation. So if you do that, if the board refuses to accept the resignation, brace yourself for some serious investor and proxy advisor angst, a lot of scrutiny, maybe even some media attention, and it rarely happens. Here's an example of a company that did that. Here's an 8K disclosure, and as you can see, it was about 15 years ago. It's happened more frequently than in the last 15 years, but you might go a couple of years without seeing one of these. Number 4, shareholder nominated director nominees. So shareholders have the ability to nominate a director, and then that, according to the disclosure in most proxy statements, that shareholder nominated candidate will go through the same process as our own candidates. Yeah, right. Number 5, admission ticket. When companies hold in-person annual meetings as opposed to virtual, some require an admission ticket to gain admittance. This enables them to have an orderly process. So there will be disclosure in the proxy statement about how to obtain an admission ticket. And the disclosure for me, which is a CYA, is that you need an admission ticket in your own name to be able to attend in person. So sometimes there'll be disclosure that a shareholder can send a representative. That's commonly allowed, but that you have to go through the process of getting admission tickets in that representative's name, so that when they show up at the meeting, they have to show a government issued ID in order to gain admission. There's often a deadline for when these requests for admission tickets will be honored. 2 weeks before the annual meeting date is common. And you can see an example here. It's Disney, who's actually pretty generous. Then they allow a shareholder to bring a guest. You have to go through a registration process, and then you will print out your own admission tickets. They'll be processed in the order received, and seating is on a first come, first served basis. So perhaps the Walt Disney shareholders meeting gets a lot of attention. Of course, you need to show your government issued ID to get in. 6, other matters not on the meeting agenda. So this is a ubiquitous disclosure about that there are no other matters for which we're aware of. But if other matters happen to come up, we have the discretionary authority to use your proxy and vote on the new matter how we want. And then this is sort of a twofer, because it also relates to the meeting chair's authority. So usually the board chair is the meeting chair for the annual meeting, but it could be someone else. And sometimes there's disclosure specifically about the meeting chair, that the meeting chair doesn't have to transact business or recognize nominations from someone from the floor if they don't meet the dictates of our bylaws. So it's highly unlikely that other matters will come up from the floor that the company doesn't know about, because most companies have a bylaw that's pretty restrictive about allowing a proposal from the floor. Like I said, the meeting chair will have the authority under most bylaws to rule a floor proposal out of order. This is all typically in a section called Other Matters in the proxy, tucked way at the back of the proxy, and usually the last thing. Of course, the meeting chair has the discretion to waive the ability to prevent the matter from coming to the floor, and then the company would use its discretionary authority to vote all those shares and blast the proposal into oblivion. 8, discretionary compensation level targets. We have the discretion to change our bonus pool target. So this one indeed will lead to investor and proxy advisor scrutiny, probably the most of any item on this list, other than refusing to accept a director who doesn't get a majority vote, their resignation. But that rarely happens, once every couple of years, once in a blue moon. But companies moving the targets for compensation plans happens 30 to 50 times a year. As you can see from this Equilar blog that from a couple of years ago, that's the statistics were coming out then. So you'll have disclosure in there about, maybe when we set our compensation targets too high, or that the circumstances have changed, in these days, COVID-19, and we want to award a bonus anyways, even though we didn't hit target. This gets close scrutiny, like I mentioned, from the advisors and from investors. Number 9, the beneficial ownership table for 5% holders. See my Vid-Guide. Under that table, you're allowed to limit your diligence about who's a 5% holder and what the details are about that 5% holder to the information that happens to be in your possession. And then you do an online search to look at any Schedules 13Ds and Schedules 13Gs that are in your filing stream, because they're 5% holders of your company. That filing is going to be made on your filing stream. In the rare case you happen to have more information that's actually contained in those schedules, you're on the hook for that information, but most likely all you're going to know is what's in the schedules. Anyway, companies typically put a disclaimer in each footnote for each 5% holder to reflect how they got the information they disclosed. So you can see here in the example, the information in this table is based solely on these 13Gs that were filed. Number 10, indemnification. We indemnify our directors so they're free from undue concern about personal liability. And yes, most companies do this. They give indemnification to their directors. 11, shareholder proposals veracity. These shareholder proposals may have assertions we believe are incorrect. We have not attempted to refute all these inaccuracies. This is sometimes an introduction to the shareholder proposal section. Makes it seem like all the shareholder proposals are rife with falsehoods. It does to me a little bit. Anyways, I noted in my Vid-Guide about what you need to disclose in the proxy about shareholder proposals under Rule 14A 8L2. A company is not directly or indirectly liable for the language in the shareholder proposal or the supporting statement that they include in the proxy. So if that part of the proxy has false and misleading information, because you have a third party, a shareholder proposal and the supporting statement in your proxy, you're not on the hook for that. But still, some companies choose to challenge false and misleading disclosure by submitting a no action letter to the CorpFin staff. making arguments under Rule 14A8I3 that they're false and misleading, and this would result, if in extreme circumstances, if it was very egregious, in an exclusion of the shareholder proposal. That's pretty rare. Instead, it usually results, the company is successful in its arguments to the staff, that results in surgical changes to the proposal, supporting statement, just those couple of words, phrases that were deemed to be false and misleading. But the staff in recent years has tightened around what it finds to be false and misleading, and some companies choose not to battle it. Why would they want to change the proposal and supporting statement to look better, to make it look like a fifth grader didn't write it? Because then it's more likely the shareholders support it if it doesn't have typos. If it has typos, shareholders will be like, why would I support this? Of course, if the shareholder proposal and supporting statement look professional, but there are misleading statements that are material, some serious things, you would want to challenge it under I3 in a no action request, and that still does happen. 12, director retirement policies. We have a retirement policy for directors at this age, but we can waive it if it's in the best interest of the company. This goes to the debate about how do you ensure board refreshment? How do you politely remove aging directors from your board? Term limits or retirement ages, a combination of both. The problem is sometimes boards reserve the ability to waive these term limits or retirement ages, and not every company allows waivers. But if you do, and then you actually exercise your authority to grant a waiver, you do it for one director, then there's going to result perhaps in hurt feelings from other directors that don't get that same accommodation. 13, board leadership. I don't think this disclosure is that common, but it was interesting. We can change our board leadership structure at any time. The appropriate structure can change as circumstances warrant, but occasionally you do see this disclosure like you do here. So if a company is standing up and saying, we'll combine the CEO and chair position as we see fit. There's been a long-standing debate whether the combined CEO chair is a good thing or a bad thing. The upshot to me is that it's a facts and circumstances determination, a mix of who the person is, what kind of character they have, how strong is the board, can they push back against that person if necessary, what are the circumstances in which this is all happening within the company right now, within the industry, is there upheaval?
Dude, finish this Vid-Guide already, will ya?
I'm at a loss for a word. 14, the last one, audit committee report, the safe harbor. So I just threw this one in here too, even though it's fairly rare. A statement at the end of the audit committee report that this thing ain't soliciting material nor incorporated by reference into any other filing. There's no need for this disclosure because it happens automatically. That's how the safe harbor works. In instruction 1 to item 407D of regulation SK, the safe harbor is only blown if a company specifically requests. And then when I say blown, they purposely want to blow it. If a company specifically requests that the audit committee report be treated as soliciting material or incorporated by reference into another SEC filing. Of course, having this CYA doesn't hurt. Any CYA doesn't hurt. It's just a matter of how much of these do you want in your proxy. And there's actually very few, like I mentioned at the top of this video. There are separate Vid-Guides covering nearly all these topics in more detail up on zippypoint.com, or you can search YouTube with the hashtag of #zippypoint and a search term matching the topic you're interested in.